Welcome to Two Millennials and Mom, where we bring you engaging conversations and respectful disagreement across the social spectrum.
Injected with the quirks of everyday life.
Grow up as we navigate the complexities of this modern world with all the humor and warmth we can muster.
And the occasional gentle ribbing. We're glad you're here. Happy listening.
Hello, hello, hello.
Howdy. Hiya.
Welcome to another Two Millennials and Mom. Other millennial, Mom, how are y'all?
I'm well.
I'm good.
How are you?
Sleepy.
Yeah.
Me too. But I'm kind of excited about this. Talking about our little home state of Texas. Yeah.
Oh, if little is a great adjective there. But yeah, so this week we're talking about Texas and some of the changes that Texas has seen over time. Callie found a Times article from 2013, I believe, talking and making some predictions about some things that are going on in the Lone Star State. So we'll just kind of kick this off. Where were you? What were you doing 15 years ago?
So you were just getting out of school.
I was still in school in 2010. I didn't graduate until 2011. So right now, 15 years ago would have been right at the end of my junior year in high school.
I'd been out of college.
I feel like I was doing the same thing I'm doing now. I mean, it just wasn't chasing after you. I was working, different company, but we were living here, had been here for a couple of years and working. And
Yeah. I was working. I was out of college in Waco. I was living in Waco and I'd bought my house there.
Yeah. So maybe this is a better kind of a question. Since then, what are the changes that you have perceived around us here at home?
I think we've become a more conservative state. And we have a number of neighbors who have moved from very liberal states to Texas. And they moved to Texas because, eventually the cost of living is better. There's no state income tax. And even though wages may be a little bit lower, when you really put it down on paper, it's usually a better bet money wise. But they've moved because their area, Washington and Oregon, have become so liberal that they just, were uncomfortable. And so they've moved to Texas because of its conservative status.
It's interesting that you use that word conservative specifically, because I was just sitting here thinking, I think Texas has become more diverse because we have welcomed so many other people from so many other kind of walks of life. We've had a massive influx of people from New York and California. We've had a massive influx of people from places like you said, Washington and Oregon. And the people who were coming from those states are very proud to come from those states and to be here now. This is the best move that I've ever had. This is the best thing that we've ever done for our family. But then kind of on the opposite side of that, like you said, you have all of these people coming from a lot more liberal areas and kind of backgrounds. And there's that whole thing in Texas about, like, you see bumper stickers all the time about don't California my Texas. Don't bring all of your liberal drama here. That's not what we're here for.
It brings a whole new meaning to don't mess with Texas.
Yes.
Yeah, don't turn Austin into LA.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think I would
Austin's
probably...
too weird to turn into LA.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you say that, but...
Just sitting here thinking, I think Austin's weirder than LA.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
We'll talk about Austin a little bit more later on, but I would say that population-wise, I would think that over the last 15 years, Texas has not become more conservative, but probably more moderate because of all of that external influence. But you see a lot of those transplants that are coming here that are saying, hey, there are still some liberal values, if you will, that I support. However, I'm not in support of some of these policies that are being enacted because they don't make very much sense to me. So they still support certain pieces of policy, but then they have moved to become more conservative on other pieces of policy, which to me personally, I think that in the long run, that's probably a good thing. Like Callie talked about, that increase in diversity of ideas is the best way to make your ideas stronger.
I'm sitting here thinking we live on a cul-de-sac, and I think there's almost 10 houses on our side of the cul-de-sac, and I'm the only native Texan.
Really? I forget about that.
Yep, we've got people from Kentucky and New York and New Jersey and California and Alabama, Mississippi. We've got some other people from other parts of the world, and yeah, I'm the only native Texan. Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, because kind of the first point to hit today is that population growth and how much of it is domestic transplants. Let's see here, from 2010 to 2023, almost 10 million people moved to Texas. That's a massive increase in population. So let's see.
Well, and I think one of the things that caught our attention with this article from 2013, which was really talking about that migration and why people were migrating to Texas. The article it wasn't the great state of, but it was talking about Texas being,
I think it was the United States of Texas.
The United States of Texas. There you go.
Yes.
But that it was from 2013, but as you read it, you couldn't have taken it out of 2025. It was so close in character to so much of what they were reporting at that time that was unique.
I'm sitting here looking at a list because I just wanted to find ways to kind of in my brain quantify how many 10 million people really is. So 10 million people is the equivalent of the entire population of Honduras or the UAE, the entire population of Sweden, Portugal, Papua New Guinea, Greece, Hungary. All of those places have a population of about 10 million people. I mean, those are entire countries.
More than the entire population of New York.
Yes, of New York City.
Wow. I think we're so big and spread out that we don't think about that. You know?
Yes.
But it's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. And I think a lot of people, especially if you're not from here, have a really hard time conceptualizing how big Texas really is. You know, from east to west is longer than from Houston to Chicago, like across the country.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they live in Illinois, and they were just going to run over to Indiana to do a quick thing. And I started laughing because I thought, I can't run over to another state. At the very best, I'm about an hour and a half from Oklahoma. But
yeah.
I mean, if you want me to go somewhere else, I'm hours away to get there. You could spend all day trying to cross the state of Texas. I think it's 13 hours from east to west.
I think it's longer than that.
No, I don't know.
This says it's 791 miles across.
So that big.
But that's another thing. And Texans kind of get blamed for this. Texans don't say, oh, it's X number of miles. This is how long it takes to get across. Yes.
Yeah.
And I did not know that was a Texas-centric thing until the last few years. And people are like, only you do that. Only you guys do that. I have been
asking people if they travel internationally what they say when people ask them where they're from. Because we've talked about this before, that people from Texas say that they're from Texas. They don't say that they're from the U.S. or America. They say, oh, we're from Texas. And they get a different response because they say they're from Texas than they do if they say they're from America.
Well, and I think that there's a pride point that comes with that. Like, if you're from Rhode Island, you don't say, oh, I'm from Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Not because you're disappointed in Rhode Island. Maybe you are. I don't know. I mean, but Texans are Texans first and Americans second, primarily.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and I didn't know this for a long time, but I grew up in a house that was very Texas centric. And I'm not saying that that's good or bad. I just was surprised. My mom was an avid, devout Texan. And so if you'd have come to her and said, should we secede and be our own thing, she would have said, yeah, let's go. I mean, and you have to think about it. We have our own electric grid structure. We do things on our own an awful lot. There is a different attitude about being a Texan
Yes.
than a Rhode Island. Would that be
Rhode Islander.
a Rhode Islander? Thank you.
Yes.
So,
And I think that that's really, really common among particularly native Texans. But I think it's something that we're kind of instilling into those transplants of, hey,
oh yeah.
it's different here.
Mm-hmm.
Think about y'all talked about bumper stickers, but there's one that's very common about, I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here as fast as I could.
Mm-hmm.
And we do, and I would say this even with a massive immigration, you kind of have to prove yourself. You can't just come in and say, oh, I'm going to be a Texan. You kind of have to step it up and figure out,
How
what
to drive
that
in the
means.
right lane.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that is not something that we as Texans are good at.
We as Texans are great at. Everybody from everywhere else is not very great at it, and we do not give them much leeway and or slack.
The
I
left
was
lane is for
laughing.
doing illegal shit.
The left lane is not from you unless you've lived here for a minimum of a decade. The left lane is
No.
not for you.
You can be in the left lane if you've been here for a day, but get out of the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I was laughing. You and Brittany were talking, she's from Wisconsin, and y'all were talking about if you learn to drive in Houston, you can drive anywhere.
Anywhere. A ton of people, lots of aggression. It's like going to work on a NASCAR track. Always
you
exciting.
say that, but when I lived in Houston and, you'd have issues with the signal lights, people knew what to do. Maybe that's just the commonality of having issues with the signal lights, but you didn't have people jumping their turn. I think about going up, we've got a four-way stop, and you just think, people, this is simple. Yield to the people on your right. Who gets there first gets to go. But in Houston, there was a courtesy or an understanding of how you were supposed to do all of those stops. And I still say I admire them because they were good about that, even though it happened a lot.
We still know what to do. I think we as a society, overarching society, not just Texans, not just Houstonians, I think we've become selfish. And I think that what I'm doing is the most important thing. And so whether or not I have the right of way, I am the one in the biggest hurry. It doesn't matter about anybody else. And that sucks.
Could be true.
Yeah.
That could
and
be true.
impatience.
Yeah.
And improper time management. Because
absolutely.
I see so many people that are in such a big hurry, and I'm just like, okay, just so you know, 4 seconds off of your time to work, not going to make that big of a difference.
Yeah. And the threat that you're causing in that interim, in those 4 seconds, or in that time to save those 4 seconds, is it really worth it? Or should you have gotten up 2 minutes earlier and gotten out the door 2 minutes earlier?
Yeah. Or 20.
Or 20.
We talked about conservative, and I was surprised to look at that most of the major cities tend to lean liberal. And so yet when you look at voting, it's a pretty Republican state. And so I was really curious, and Callie and I did some digging on that. While your big cities tend to be liberal, your rural areas, which actually turn out to be the bigger population, are very conservative. I was surprised.
if you have 10 large cities, but you have 1,000 small cities, even if they have 1/10 of the population, still significantly outsizes the 10 larger cities.
That's just how math works.
When you talk to me about rural areas, I'm thinking about, the Four Sixes Ranch where there's not 1,000 people.
But that's not really a town. That's one
It's
individual.
But I'm also
homestead.
thinking about Lorenzo, Texas, or Rawls, or Crosbyton. Those are not, those are probably under 1,000 people in those little communities. Now, are there a bunch of those little communities? And so it surprised me how that worked out. And then when we were looking at who was the conservative city, what it really looks like is some of that is oil based. Although Houston's, I guess, a exception on that. But some of those look like Midland and Odessa.
Houston has a lot more going on for it than just oil infrastructure.
True.
Oil
Yes.
infrastructure is a part of Houston's economy, but it is not the main part or the only part. Where in places like Midland and Odessa, that is the
That's it.
primary junction to the economy is through oil production.
Yeah. And we've seen booms in those areas. I mean, there was a point in time, because I'm in healthcare, that you couldn't hire an aide because she could go to work at the McDonald's and make more money because Midland was booming so much with what was going on with it. You could work a McDonald's job and make more money than you could work as a career in an industry somewhere.
Well, and the other thing I think that we found really fascinating was in those more conservative cities, the top most conservative cities in Texas, it was really heavy oil and gas leanings. And then the other kind of flag, if you will, was Christian colleges.
Yeah.
And how that impacts things. And so Cole, Mom and I had a conversation about this specifically. And we were talking about Lubbock is a college town and it has all of these people in it. And I'm like, but who's going to tech?
Yeah.
You don't have people from these big, huge metropolitan cities and areas going to tech. You have people, there are, but primarily you have people from smaller rural towns funneling into Lubbock versus coming in mass cattle call like you do to someplace like Austin.
Yeah, for sure. Austin, which is kind of particularly over the last 5 years or so since the COVID era, has seen a massive influx of transplants. Corporations are moving here. Individuals, influencers are moving here for a multitude of reasons, because the way that they treated the pandemic was so much different. The way that those entities and individuals are taxed is so much different. There is so much less craziness, politically speaking, from their perspectives, that it seems like a much safer bet to move to somewhere like Austin. That, yeah, maybe the climate isn't quite as enjoyable all of the time, and yeah, maybe the scenery isn't quite as beautiful, but you're not living under this constant stress of, okay, you can't go look at the hills around Austin and try and compare them to Yosemite. Sorry, you just can't.
The Greenville versus Big Bend.
I mean, there's quite a bit of diversity. I think you could find a pretty good place.
You
somewhere.
can, but you're also going to pay for that because a lot of people have that same mentality. And so that is, again, the basic economics of supply and demand. When you have a bunch of people coming in saying, hey, this is what I want, I can utilize the diversity in industry and trade that is going on, whether you want to be a hairstylist or a tech bro, you want to be in the medical industry or a football coach, like there's opportunity for all of these different walks of life. And Austin has a lot of variety in that. I have always said, you talked about where I was 15 years ago. I was living in Waco, but I was spending a lot of time in Austin with a bunch of friends who lived there full time. And I loved going to visit, but I don't want to move to Austin. I was never cool enough to be in Austin. I never had enough Instagram followers to be in Austin full time or enough tattoos or any of this, because they were much more liberal and hippie and open. And Callie was the conservative one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, Austin is kind of its own little subsect of Texas, right? And it does look different than anywhere else. And then you sit here and compare it to Houston, which is a lot more old money because you have the infrastructure set in oil and gas, or compare it to Dallas, where you have much more white collar kind of old money. But then you've got places like Austin who, what are they calling it? Silicon Hills. You have Silicon Valley out on the West Coast. And now you're talking about it has become a hub for technology. In fact, you guys, I just saw a deal before we sat down to record this about Elon Musk's Starbase is becoming Texas's newest city. I mean, you've got huge corporations, especially in the technology sector, and Elon Musk is a perfect prime example. I mean, I've got friends still in Waco who are impacted almost daily by all of the testing and things that they do right there outside of Waco and McGregor for SpaceX. And then you go down South Texas and you've got SpaceX stuff down there. And I mean, do you guys remember when you couldn't even sell Teslas in Texas? It was when they first kind of came out, and it was like, no, we're not doing that here. I mean, they could have a showroom, but they couldn't actually sell vehicles here for a long time. And it was several years. You had to have them imported from another state.
Was that just from a lack of infrastructure?
No, there was something.
I think it had to do with oil and gas.
Yeah.
I see that too.
And now he's got a plant here outside of Austin. Or
Yeah.
between Austin and Waco.
Gigafactory, or is the Gigafactory in Nevada?
It was Cole. The reason that they couldn't sell here was because of legislation for direct sales to customers, because they weren't going through car company.
A dealer.
Yes.
They didn't have dealerships here.
Yes. Car manufacturers had to sell cars to dealerships, and dealerships then had to license that car to be able to sell it direct to consumers.
I'd kind of forgotten about that.
That's kind of weird.
Yeah. In fact, I just pulled up an article from 2021. Tesla moves to Texas, but still can't sell there.
That's only been 4 years ago. Wow.
Yeah. But you've got all of these technology-based businesses and technology industry people that have come in and said, hey, due to the, I don't even want to call it lack of regulations, but because the regulations in Texas were so much less stringent than they were in some place like California. I mean, how often have you guys picked up a product, any product? My favorite is gas cans. Hey, these gas cans are not California code compliant, And you get all like weird things and you're like, why is this cheese grater not allowed in California? But it's because they have different legislation and lots more stringent laws that say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And you can consider that a good thing or a bad thing, I'm sure, depending on how you look at it. But Texas has less of that. And so then you've got, I mean, Facebook has moved a large portion of their company here. They are just utilizing Texas as a major tech hub for the lack of mandates, the lack of
the regulatory scene in Texas is so much more relaxed than a lot of the rest of the country. I mean, there are only a couple states that are like considered to be more business forward than Texas, like Delaware maybe. But because of Texas's traditionally conservative political standing, they kind of have that idea of, okay, let's try and keep government small. Let's try and deregulate what we can, regulate what we have to, and that's really beneficial for corporations. The less rules they have to follow, the wider their profit margins tend to be. And so to me, I'm a little bit surprised that it took as long as it did. But I mean, there are lots of corporations who have been based in Texas for a really long time. And you know, maybe some of that is because other states across the union have increased their level of regulatory stipulation relatively quickly over the last 10 to 15 years. And added a lot of new regulations that, okay, maybe it's starting to make a little bit more sense why those corporations are almost being forced to move to Texas. One, with a little bit of foresight to say, okay, if Texas regulation has moved at this pace and everywhere else has moved at this pace, then it makes a whole lot more sense to go ahead and bite the bullet, move to a less regulated area, a less regulated state that is going to stay less regulated for longer. Then that certainly makes a lot of sense.
And at the same time, I've had an associate who may have turned down a promotion because it would have meant moving to Texas. I think a lot of that was the politics of Texas, because it appears to be so very heavily Republican that she was like, I'm not moving to Texas.
Well, within the last few years, it certainly has become more and more conservative, more and more Republican, more and more Christian nationalist, agenda based. I mean, but at the same time, Texas is one of 9 states out of the entire country that doesn't have doesn't have income tax.
Income tax.
State income tax.
State tax.
And so that makes a big difference. So if you're a big, huge company who has all of these employees and you're looking at somewhere that has a lower cost of living, maybe their paycheck looks different. We've had to explain to several people, your paycheck looks different here, but at the end of the day, you take home more because you don't have this income tax, because the cost of living is lower. I mean, Texas, is it still affordable? I don't think that it is the way that it was 15
but
years
it's
ago.
more so than other places.
Yeah.
If you want to go
Sure.
to California, the same house in California is going to cost you nearly twice as much as one here. And so if
not more.
have the housing prices in Texas gone up? Definitely in the last couple of years, but they're still lower than California.
Yeah,
Right.
everything has gone up in price in the last couple of years, particularly housing prices. And that's probably a topic for another day. I mean, there's a point here where housing prices in Austin, the median home price has more than doubled from 2010 to 2022. But at the same
Which is
time,
shocking.
right, but it's
Supply and
because the
demand.
demand there is so high. But there are also a lot of people who are speculating that Austin's housing bubble is on the verge of a burst. And when that happens, those housing prices likely will come down significantly.
But also, like at some point, you have to sit here and say, hey, Austin to a point is fairly landlocked. And they can only grow so far because you do have, I mean, and the surrounding suburbs of Austin, if you will, Georgetown, Pflugerville, Austin, Kyle, Buda, New Braunfels, even that far south, all of those places have seen huge expansions in their population and have had to build the infrastructure to support this big, huge population increase. And everybody in those areas has benefited from that. But it comes at a cost.
Yeah, it does. So
You know,
you want to talk about food culture? I mean, you're going to eat good in Texas.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And that point always makes me think particularly of Houston. Houston being a port city is just probably, I would imagine, statistically speaking, more likely to be more diverse. Port cities in general have a tendency to be more diverse, have a much larger array of cultures that are domiciled there, if you will. And so that's one of my favorite reasons to go to Houston is because of the food diversity. There's so much different stuff there, and I love to try new things. And so,
But I think that's
Texans,
even bled here into Denton, where you can get a much wider variety than you used to could. If you want used to could, there's your Texas.
I heard it.
Sorry about that. But I mean, I can think off the top of my head a number of Vietnamese places in Denton now that you didn't have even just a few years ago. So I think that food diversity is spreading and coming. And I'm sure that is based on some of the immigration that we're seeing, but it's not a bad thing.
oh, no, not at all.
Yeah, I mean, but I think Cole's right. Houston has here for the last several years been recognized as America, not the world, but America's most diverse food city in the country. And
can
I
see that.
mean, you're right, Mom. You could go in Denton and you could find Vietnamese food and Chinese food and Mexican food. But what about Ethiopian food? What about Cambodian food or Honduran food? I mean, like, Houston is such a melting pot of so many different cultures and people. You have people who are like, hey, I want to bring this taste of home here. I want to share it with my community here, my new home here in Houston. And as a Houstonian, I couldn't be more grateful.
Yeah.
I love it. I love getting to try everybody else's grandma's recipes and what they grew up on and what is meaningful to them and what speaks to their soul and their heart. Like, I think that's awesome.
And this is pure speculation, but you've got other port cities that are older than Houston. I'm thinking like of New York. And New York, you would have to consider to be very diverse. But I also am wondering if the immigration in New York is traditionally speaking been there for longer. So a lot of those communities that move to and stay in New York are already developed communities that are kind of established. And so there's not a whole lot, like you have an area for almost each different kind of culture, like a borough, if
Chinatown.
you will.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm wondering if maybe that is a little bit less established in a city like Houston. And so instead of having, well, you've got one borough over here for this group and one borough over here for another group, they're all kind of just dotted around, mixed in with each other. And that gives you kind of a different effect where it's because everybody is everywhere and not kind of isolated to their own little zones, if it's more apparent, that diversity. You know what I mean?
I could see that.
Or assimilated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, and there are statistics. I'm trying to remember what it is, how based on how many different restaurants there are in Houston. I heard a statistic ages ago that I always tell visitors, like, okay, you could eat at a different place for breakfast, lunch, and dinner at a different place for, I think it's something like more than 20 years before you had to repeat a place. And even then, by the time you came around to 20 years and having to restart your list, so many new places have changed and turned over or started that you would never finish. I will say, I personally don't believe that Houston does a great job at Italian food.
Maybe you just haven't found the right place yet.
Yeah, you tell that to everybody in Houston who's sitting here on all of these food blogs who's going, okay, this is not as great as New York's Italian scene.
Wow.
Well, but again, you have an established community in New York, whereas I would hypothesize, if you will, that it's probably much less established. And you probably have a smaller Italian population in Houston than you do in New York because of that established community that's already there.
Sure.
Yeah.
We definitely do. But it's so strange to me. How can we have such a thriving Ethiopian community and food scene and we don't have great Italian food? And we've got great friends who are natural born Italians and they're like, yeah, this just doesn't cut it. Like, it's a good try, but this isn't the same. This isn't real Italian. This is, we talk about Americanized Chinese food and things like this. You've Americanized, bastardized Italian food here. You're just not hitting the nail on the head. Sorry, guys.
Well, isn't that what Tex-Mex is? It's not really Mexican food. It's its own variety.
I mean, yeah.
Isn't that the same thing?
That doesn't make it Mexican food. That's why it gets a new name.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Other things that you think Texas is unique about, considering that immigration and the diversity that's coming in?
I think it's been, especially from a Houston standpoint, I think it's been really interesting to watch how Texas as a whole has changed their attitude on alternative energy outside of just fossil fuels. Especially out West Texas, you've got big, huge wind farms and solar farms and things like this. Whereas in general, thanks to oil and gas, and especially the Houston industry that is oil and gas, Texas, I believe it has the 8th largest GDP in the world. Remember, I think California, I think it just recently moved and it's higher than it was. I think they were 5th and now they're 3rd or 4th. But as a state, Texas owes a lot of that to the oil and gas industry. There's a lot of money that comes from oil and gas that is injected into that GDP. And so I think it's been really fascinating to watch how alternative energy has changed, especially when you're talking about places like Austin, who were like, okay, let's do solar. Let's do a big push. Let's make sure that this is a big thing. And then, Mom, you mentioned earlier, Texas is the only state in the entire United States that is on their own electric grid. You have essentially 3 electric grids in the United States: East Side, West Side, and Texas. And the fact that we do that, why do we do that? I don't think that it's perfect in my own personal opinion, but neither here nor there. It is how it is. And so why is that the case? Why does that make a difference? Should we stay on our own? What does that bring to who? Does that bring benefit to customers? I mean, you're sitting here talking about Winter Storm Uri back in 2021. That was the weekend that we moved into our house. And so we have an empty house with nothing, and our electric can't be turned on because the Texas power companies, ERCOT, has said, we're not taking any phone calls because this is a huge disaster. And I think 289 people died because they didn't have electricity.
Wow.
And is that a great thing? No. But we don't have nearly the rolling blackouts that California or New York does even now,
Puerto Rico,
or Puerto Rico.
bless their hearts.
Isn't Texas one of only 7 or 8 states that actually is subsidizing solar?
I believe so. I believe so.
I mean, whether you're for or against solar energy is not exactly the point here. Obviously,
Right.
there are pros and cons of any of those systems. But I think I do find it very interesting for a state that is so
Heavily
invested in non-renewable energy. I mean, because you've got to think about it. Texas isn't just a hub of oil and gas exploration. It's also a hub of oil and gas production and refinement. Houston in particular is a massive refinement hub. And we as citizens of Texas benefit from that pretty significantly.
Yes.
Gas prices in Texas have never been and probably never will be as high as states like California, Oregon, and Washington.
We
Part of
tend to
that is
always be on the low side.
yeah. And part of that is because we're so much closer to that production.
Yeah. Getting it here.
Yeah, is so much more cost effective. And also, regulatorily speaking, we're much more friendly towards the use of those energy resources. Also, I still don't think that's perfect, but
do you
Right.
anticipate that'll change with our current administration pulling away from a lot of those clean energy things and Texas being a red state, that it'll change? Are we going to step away from that, or are we diverse enough and independent enough to maintain those?
here's the thing. We have to remain diverse enough with these energy resources because we don't have enough oil and gas to do the things that we want to do. So we have to keep exploring alternative energy sources just because we can't make it fast enough.
Which is kind of why I'm giggling, Mom. Go into what? What are you going to go to? We're sitting here talking about electric cars being better for the environment. When you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, electric cars are not more environmentally friendly. We do not have the infrastructure to supply, and I'm not talking we, Texas, we, the world, do not currently have the infrastructure to supply electricity to all of these cars to get people in the same situation that they're in today of this is how much I commute, this is how much I drive per day, per week, per year, whatever that is. Where are you going to go? I mean, the wind is fantastic. Okay, cool. We don't have control over that. The sun, let's use solar power. How are you going to bank it? I mean, where are you going to put it all? You can only store it for so long. And those storage systems are incredibly.
Still in their infancy.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Right now,
Go ahead.
Right now, there's so much up in the air and so much learning to be done about how to do that safely, that in a lot of ways, those storage systems can be very dangerous. I have a MacBook sitting here that we replaced one of the batteries on this week because they were literally smoking and getting ready to explode. I mean, it's smaller than my phone. We had to figure out how to dispose of that battery. It's just a little foil lithium battery pack kind of thing. And what happens when you take that into a car?
Yeah.
Those batteries aren't this big, those batteries are much larger. And I mean, it just is talking about it being in its infancy is the perfect thing to say, because there's so much room for growth and there's so much opportunity for growth, but we have to figure that out. We're not there yet. And so as a tree hugger, I would love to see us go away from fracking and fossil fuels and our heavy reliance on them, but we have to go to something else, and that isn't developed yet.
Well, and I go back to that part from Landman that you guys sent me here a while back with Billy Bob Thornton talking about the windmills and how much the cost of those relies on fossil fuel.
Yeah, the concrete mix to set the base and the steel used and all the trucks to get it all out there.
Yeah, you're not saving money yet.
Yeah, it will never produce as much energy as was used to build it.
Never.
Yes.
Well, and I was talking to Trey the other day about solar at his house. When we were over there for Easter, his neighbors have solar set up on one of their like not an outhouse, but an outbuilding. And that's the thing, like the state subsidized a lot of that for that outbuilding because it had solar. But I mean, Trey was talking to the solar rep, and he was like, hey, like, I mean, it's probably not worth it right now for you to do this because I mean, you're going to break even in the long run probably, but the battery technology is not there to support this kind of input right now.
No, not at all.
You end up paying for it even with the subsidies for such a long time that it doesn't pay off, and then it doesn't produce as easily as what we think it will be. So it's kind of interesting. It kind of feels damned if you do and damned if you don't, honestly, when it comes to energy.
I mean, that goes right back to that monologue from Billy Bob that you were just talking about. We're going to run out of it before we find a replacement. We've got an entire economy that is built on it. I mean, everything, the clothes that I'm wearing, the microphone that I'm talking into, the computers that we're using right now, none
the
of
lotion
that
we put on our hands, the lipstick on your face, your glasses, your cell phone, everything, every car tire, every piece of clothing, your toothbrush, all of it. We're so reliant on fossil fuels.
Our entire economy is based on it.
Yep.
And we're over here fighting about it not being good enough, it not being the right thing to do.
Right.
I mean, I get what you're saying, but what do we do instead?
Mm-hmm.
Do we go back to pre-industrial revolution? Good luck. These kids really like their iPads, man.
Yeah.
You don't think a candle's going to work with that? Huh?
Probably not.
You're going to have lots of really feisty people on your hands.
Well, let's kind of segue here a little bit. We're talking a little bit about infrastructure. And Callie, you'd brought up Winter Storm Uri. Let's talk about some of like the climate impacts on the state of Texas and what we have seen. I was talking to a buddy of mine yesterday morning. We were playing a round of golf, and he said something that I didn't really respond to it, but it really struck me at the time. He had been talking to another friend, and the statement that was made is, this is really weird for Texas. We're actually getting a spring this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, when you think about that and the implications and ramifications behind that, it's kind of true, but it's also
kind of scary. What does that mean?
Scary. Yeah. I mean, because everybody talks about global warming, but I don't think a lot of people understand the ramifications of that global warming and what and how that impact is going to affect the world.
Right. Because historically speaking, when you go back and look at all of the data, especially on Texas weather, Texas summers, which we are known for and sweat through the pride of, Texas summers are hotter than they've ever been, are longer than they've ever lasted, and are drier than ever before, with record-breaking heat waves nearly every year in the last 15 years. I remember when I was in Waco, you guys remember those counters? It's like, it's been X number of days since we've had an accident. There was one on the news every morning in Waco, and we are now going to hit 100 days over 100 degrees. And how crazy that was. I mean, in a lot of ways, Central Texas, Waco is not a desert.
Yeah.
But it kind of is too. And what that means and what that looks like. And to have 100 days over 100 degrees, I personally love it. I think it's fantastic. But like Cole said, the ramifications of that and what that means in the long run are not beneficial to our environment, to our bodies, to our health. And you're right. We are absolutely getting a spring. And in my personal opinion, spring is my favorite season and is the best of all of them. But what that means is we're going to have a really rough summer. It may start a little bit later than it normally does, but when is it going to end? how long is it going to be? I like to give people in Chicago a hard time. You guys sit in the freezing cold for 9 months out of the year, and they're like, yeah, but those other 3 or 4 months, they're the best and they're totally worth it. And they stand by that, and that's awesome. But if we're going to sit here and start heating up Texas even more and for longer periods of time
with a structure that's
with the
antiquated.
infrastructure that is antiquated and not current and up to date and on our own for our power grid, then what?
I mean, and on the other end of that, I think our winters are getting colder.
Yeah.
So it's not just that everything is getting hotter in the summertime, it's that we're seeing more extremes on both ends.
Yes.
I can see it just in our vegetation that it's, this year particularly, everything is blooming much later than it did because it stayed colder. And it's not like we had, horrendous cold spells. I mean, I got really tickled because somebody that was new to Texas said, "Is it time to put away all my winter clothes?" And whoever was online laughed at him and go, "Honey, you live in Texas. You don't ever change because tomorrow could be totally different." And it's kind of true, but I would also say you can feel a shift just in watching the plants that bloom and when they bloom and when they go away. There is a distinct shift here that you kind of, I feel, just out of step in, planting too early, or am I expecting this too early, or just things are just off. Don't get me wrong. I would love a long spring growing season. I mean, that just means my hydrangeas are going to look great. But at the same time, there are some repercussions to that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that long spring can kind of be a little bit of a false sense of security, I feel like. A long spring season for all of your vegetation means you have to water it and keep it all moist and not crispy. And where does that water come from? Where are those resources coming from? How are they being utilized? And then when we do get into dry season, we've got the droughts that are coming through, and then the wildfires. We
Dad
just
was
saw.
reading an article yesterday of the 10 dirtiest lakes in Texas. You want to guess which one was on the list that we live close to?
I'm almost certain I can tell you.
It was Louisville. And so when we looked at
That
what
one's
it
notorious for being a relatively dirty lake.
When we looked at it though, Cole, it was really kind of frightening because the impact of that is that particular type of algae grows and that reduces the habitat for everything else. And so you end up with a lake that can't support its normal habitats because of the dirt in the lake. I have to say I was shocked. I think of Louisville as not being a safe lake. I don't think of Louisville as being a dirty lake. But it's one of the top 10 in the state. And just the
there are
ramifications of
things that can be done to try and remedy that. And there are some conservationists that have done some really incredible things with a lot of the lakes that have really just kind of been destroyed in the state of Texas. But with a lake the size of Lake Louisville,
Yeah.
and with one that sees as much use as Lake Louisville, it would be really difficult to do.
Yeah.
It would be something that all of the communities surrounding that lake would have to consciously make an effort to
Care
try and
about.
rectify. And I don't know if people are willing to give up their water skiing long enough to make that happen.
Yeah.
Well, and you guys talked about natural disasters. Cole, when we moved into this house, we were having a 100-year flood. That was one of the reasons why we found this house, is because some of the roads were closed. But we've had more 100-year floods in the last 15 years. So it's not really a 100-year flood if you're having it more often
Yeah,
than
it's more like
100
an
years.
annual flood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Becomes
so,
normal.
You've got that. You've got Harvey. Callie, you've ridden out several significant hurricanes in Houston, and they just seem to be more prolific, more. They're costing more.
Well, and it really truly has become more of a game of roulette as to who it's going to impact today, who it's going to impact this
True.
time. And so I've lived in a couple of different areas of Houston, and okay, this one got hit really hard. Okay, this one got hit really hard. Okay, across the street from me got hit really hard. And so it just is, it's such a crapshoot for what all is going to happen. You're going to have it. You're going to take it all on the chin. How bad is it going to be?
Yeah.
How long is it going to last? And how are you going to get out of it? I had a friend of mine here during Harvey specifically that their house flooded. They have a beautiful 2-story home that backs up to one of the smaller bayous, and their house flooded, chest deep in water running through their house. And she had 2 little kids. And I remember her saying that her whole mentality changed when she's having to empty her house by the boatload. She's like, Callie, a literal boatload means something different when it is all that you have left.
Yeah. And how long did it take them to repair that house?
Several
I
years.
mean, that wasn't a short, easy deal. It took them years.
Oh, yeah. There are still restaurants here. And I'm on a completely different side from where I was when Harvey hit. But I'm up here by Kingwood now, and there are places that you walk into restaurants, and there are lines marked on the wall. Hey, this is where the water was. This is where the water was during this storm or this storm. And people had to rebuild their entire livelihood, businesses, homes, schools, all of it. And especially with the administration that we have in office right now, what that looks like, I think, is going to be very different than ever before. It is being charged the states for dealing with their own natural disasters and their own problems and FEMA related issues. I was reading an article earlier this week about Arkansas, and who very heavily voted red. And you've got Sarah Huckabee Sanders, I think is her name. They have followed President Trump, and then all of these things came through, and she's declared it a disaster and all of this, and the federal government has said,
We're not helping.
You're on your own. And
Yeah.
what that means and looks like to them. And they were like, but wait, we supported you and we did this. And Trump has been like, nope, you're on your own. And how each of these states are going to have to manage that infrastructure to say, oh, we have to reallocate our budgets differently to take care of ourselves.
But if you're changing FEMA and you're changing the EPA, those are effects that are going to come down to the state in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And while Texas is a wealthy state, that still takes on a lot. So what does that change in the future to what we're looking at? Then do we end up with a state tax because we need to support FEMA kind of things, or EPA, cleaner energy? What is that going to look like, and how is that going to change us? And that's in the future. No crystal ball here at all, but it has somewhere those effects are going to show up.
And who's going to feel them first?
Yeah. Most likely the ones most hardest hit.
I think it's going to
least
resources
to rebuild.
The people who need those resources most are going to feel it first.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
yeah. And it's just
I don't know if that's going to change. We've talked about the politics some of Texas, and that, it's a Republican state. And while there are some
purple
close running
spots,
yeah, and some close running races, it's still a Republican state. And what is that going to mean in the long run?
Yeah.
And how does that change? And, for me, the question is, can we find some type of
middle
collaboration?
ground.
Yeah, even ground, because I feel like at some point we're going to have to, or we're all going to, hurt. This is going to affect us all somehow.
Yeah. And this, you guys might find this a little bit surprising, but I think Texas is a little bit unique in this. I just want to go back and touch on politics, because we didn't really dive super deep into that. And
we sometimes try to avoid that,
Yeah, I do not follow the politics of Texas super closely most of the time, because it annoys me. It frustrates me at how just silly they behave sometimes, and the stupid things that they do. The people in Texas, I talked about this a little bit earlier, I see generally starting to become more and more moderate. The transplants in particular that are coming from blue states are coming here for a reason, oftentimes because they didn't think their blue states were very well run, and they're coming for a lot of reasons: economic, political, cultural,
Cost of
whatever it
living.
is, they're coming here, and we're telling them, California, my Texas, don't turn Austin into LA. And I think that is fine in and of itself. I think it's a good thing for Texas to have its own unique culture. But what I feel like I'm seeing is that the representation in Texas, those on the right are moving further to the right, and those on the left are moving closer to the center, which half of that I think is really good. The other half is deeply concerning.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of it has, just like a lot of the politics in the rest of the country, has turned into kind of this identity politics, which I think is massively detrimental.
Dangerous.
But I hope we're moving away from that. I hope we're...
I don't know if we are.
I think 2026 election and primaries will be absolutely fascinating
I agree.
and very
Yeah.
telling as to whether or not we are or not.
But even so, here's my fear. Is that just going to be a knee-jerk reaction? Or is that going to be a trend? Is that going to be a thoughtful process that says, hey, we've got to do something. We've got to take action, and we need to do it collaboratively? Or is it just going to be a knee-jerk reaction of, I don't like who's doing what they're doing now, so I'm going to go the opposite direction?
I think that
That
will
one's
be
harder to say.
dependent on who runs and what that looks like and what those people decide to stand for. You know,
I
I
mean,
certainly hope that it's not just a knee-jerk reaction, but I personally don't love a lot of the decisions that are being made for us right now.
I would agree with you. And I'm going to say this. Texas is notorious for having some real characters in office. Historically, you might say some of them have been stinkers. Ann Richardson comes to mind. She was a Texas governor when I was younger, and I just absolutely loved her. She was a Democrat, and she spoke her mind. She was a ballsy lady, and I like that. And I would love to see somebody with that character that is willing to stand up and that is willing and wants to represent the people of Texas. And at the same time, the people of Texas are kind of the same kind. We've got some characters, and I want to keep that independence, and I want to keep that bravado, but I don't want it to be a false bravado. I want us to really care about what's happening and what's going on. And I think that's going to take a lot of education, and I'm not sure that we are going to take the time to do that, or that we have the desire to do that. Are we
I think a lot
too
of people
lazy?
do have that desire. My biggest concern, and Mom, this goes right back to what you just said. You hope that the politics represent the people. And what we're seeing right now is that the politics, even here in Texas, are doing a little bit less of representing the people from my perspective, and a little bit more of representing special interests. And
Okay, I just have to say, Cole, I feel like you've moved to my side a little bit.
what do you mean?
You sound like me when you're saying this, and you don't normally sound like me.
Well, let him rethink what he's thinking now.
I'm going to go ahead and no comment.
No, I like it.
No comment.
Okay. I'm just saying, you sound a little bit more like what is in my head.
Well,
Great.
because again, I think that what Cole was talking about a minute ago in terms of identity politics is really dangerous. Not your sentiments on it, but the concept of identity politics is really dangerous. And I think that you can look at both major political parties right now and see huge flaws. Huge flaws. If we
And no
have
desire to change them.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we have any hope for better futures, we have to change some things. Both sides have to change some things. And you can sit here and look at the politics of everything and go, hey, in my personal opinion, both sides have a lot of work to do. If you're really going to do this with any sense of moral integrity and what that means for what this party is supposed to stand for and who this party is supposed to stand for. And that's, again, not at any means to say one party is doing everything right and the other one's doing everything wrong. I don't believe that in any capacity.
No, I don't either.
I think that if what we're seeing right now, what we're seeing today isn't a motivator, a catalyst to get people excited and get people educating themselves, then we're really screwed. What is it going to take? What is it going to take for the percentage, the 3%, the 4% of the population to stand up and say, guys, this is wrong. This is what this country ran away from.
I really want to see, you've mentioned morals and integrity, and I think that's where it's going to have to go. And I talked to a person last night, and she thinks that it's going to swing back. She thinks this is just a pendulum. I'm not sure of that. But I'm with you, Callie. I would like to see, and I think there is a group of people there that can stand up and say, I want morality. I want integrity. I want honesty when you're speaking to me. I do not want to be lied to, and that we can make a difference. But here's the thing, I guess I'm going to say too. I don't think that's going to come with a Republican label. I don't think that's going to come with a Christian label. I think that's going to come with an individual standing up
human
for what they
label.
believe is correct
Yeah.
and doing that. And that we do that together, not divided and not saying, oh, I can only be X and I don't like you because you're this. We have to, and this is probably the whole essence of this thing. This is who Texans are, that they have an independence, that they have their own moral code. And I think that we could do this as Texas to step up and say, we really want to see, people be who they say they are.
I think it's
Integrity
really
prosper.
interesting that you say that, because I would love to see and would love for Texas to be the first to have a big push towards independent politicians. Because, I would say a Texan is probably the closest we ever got in recent memory to having an independent have a chance at a presidential election. But I would love to start to see more independent or third party representation, particularly in the state of Texas, because they changed the rules of presidential elections after Ross Perot.
Yeah, that's true.
Because he had such an impact. And I think a lot of that comes from the culture of Texas itself saying, hey, and I am concerned that Texas has moved away from that a little bit in recent years. But I hope that we can bring that back to say, it doesn't matter if you're red or blue. We want what is best for Texas and Texans, not what is best for your party or your party.
You talked about a pendulum a minute ago, Mom, and I hate that part. You're not wrong, but I hate that part. You guys remember that ride at an amusement park? It's normally like a boat, a ship, and it just swings back and forth, back and forth. Like Cole is saying, I want to get off the ride. I want to get off of those two extremes of people just fighting for power and actually putting legwork and thought and compassion into the rest of everyone else, beyond this group, beyond this label, but for Texans as a whole. Because I think that if we can, Cole, I think you're totally and completely right. If we can sit here and kind of lean into that Texan mentality of being uniquely independent and kind and good-hearted and led by our morals and our standards, I think that if Texas can do that.
Don't forget friendly.
Right. I was just going to say, like, you can never have a conversation with other people about Texans and the term friendly isn't brought up, because it's important to us, because we look you in the eye, because we talk to you, and it doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what you stand for. Like, we're going to talk to you and give you an opportunity more so than anywhere else, maybe in the world. And I hope that kind of mentality can shine through into politics, into an identity of its own that says, look, we're in this for the goodness of human beings, not for my bank account or my political party or my color or my side of the pendulum. We're in this for the good of people and humanity. And And I think that that starts with kindness.
Is this the 21st century call to remember the Alamo, that independence, that this was wrong, we're going to fight for this, we're going to honor who came before us?
I hope so.
Wouldn't that be amazing? I think we need to come up with a slogan, you guys, that we can push on this and say, let's go.
Yeah, I think that's a great
And,
idea.
you know, I hope that we have welcomed, and we probably have not been completely open armed with as much immigration as we have seen. You know, I know for a fact that, you know, Cole, what was it you said? Don't California my Texan. So I get that and I agree. But I think we probably need to assimilate some of the good things that have come from there too. But keep our friendliness, keep our independence, and keep that
Texas mentality.
pride, and go.
It means something, and to not lose it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and to stand on it as the foundation rather than, like I said, any specific other political party or platform, but that pride.
So let me just ask you, because there's definitely a saying, and I think we've even said it earlier in this podcast, don't mess with Texas. I mean, can we keep that slogan and still do what we're talking about? Stand up and
I think that is the ideal of that slogan.
okay.
Do you know how that slogan started? The history behind it?
It was a trash
It was
marketing.
a marketing campaign.
Yeah.
Back, I want to say in the 80s, if I remember correctly.
I think that's right.
But it was a bunch of Texas state marketing people who got together and said, hey, if we go out and tell people who have independent brains and are free thinkers and who have their own autonomy of mind, if we go out and tell them, hey, pick up your trash, they're not going to listen. They're not going to do this. And so it truly was kind of set up with a manipulation in mind, that reverse psychology of it. And it turned into one of the most successful marketing campaigns in history, much less for a state, and B, this true motto for the Texas way of life.
Yeah.
This is important to all of us. Don't screw it up. And it was a
We need to get
marketing
back to
campaign.
that.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. We do. Do y'all have other Texas stuff that you want to run through?
No, I think I'm all square on Texas.
So let's kind of shift gears a little bit into our weird thought. I saw a thread the other day and I kind of sat there scratching my head going, oh, what could these answers be? Like, and it felt like I was working through the problem in my head before I looked at the multiple choice answers, if you will, of all of the comments and responses. But the question was, what has low key destroyed society without anyone noticing at the time? And my immediate gut reaction was social media. This is going to be a great thing. This is going to connect all of us. And we have become more divided and further apart than ever before.
I mean, I think that's the biggest one.
I mean, it's just so crazy to me. We thought that this was all going to be so good, and then it wasn't. What else could be on that list?
I mean, I think it has the potential still to be positive, but we as a society have to change our mentality around it with intention in order to do so. I think that's going to be really hard.
Yes.
But I mean, stemming from that, you could say a lot of things in a similar facet. Television. There's so much distraction by people these days to binge watch their shows, and that takes away their time, their resources to do something different, to better themselves, to better their community. And I'm just as guilty as anybody, don't get me wrong. But to be perfectly honest with you, I think television has probably had a more severe impact on the world than social media. But I also think that it's been spread out over a much longer period of time. I don't think they're ruining the world, if you will, at the same rate. And so I think social media on a micro scale is more impactful from like a weighted standpoint. But I think television is just as bad. But I also think that there are positive elements of television that can be beneficial. You can use television to educate yourself, but you also
here's
have
the
to be
truth.
careful about what you're consuming.
Yeah, everything is on a scale. And if you go to either extreme,
Probably bad.
you're at significant risk. So you've got to try to pull yourself back from those extremes. I'm looking at the thread you're talking about, Callie, and this one really got me. Deciding that corporations are legal people.
Yeah, that's a big one too.
That's a big one.
Why is that? Why did we decide to do that? The
I don't know,
logic is not
that's
there for me.
another Supreme Court decision. I'm going, what?
Yep.
No.
A couple of these other answers that I thought were really fascinating. Abolishing the fairness doctrine in media and coverage, equal time being slotted for both sides and of everything, I think
That's a big one.
I think it has been really detrimental to our society.
Algorithms.
But you're going to see exactly what you want and how
Yeah.
detrimental that is. That's a great one.
I think
That's
that
a really
falls
good
under
one.
the social media umbrella because it's kind of a part of it.
I like the answer.
Could you do influencers in reality TV?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But again, I think I personally can't say that there's a positive benefit of reality TV personally. But I think there are influencers who have come to success because their intention with their influence is to better their communities and better the lives of certain people. I also think that, and I wouldn't say that that is most influencers. I think there are also, so kind of like that spectrum you were talking about, too much on either side could be
Yeah.
detrimental.
With great power comes great responsibility. And how you wield that power, A, is up to you, and B is really important.
Here's another one that kind of surprises me. Air conditioning. And the
With-
premise behind that is that because have air conditioning, we stay in our houses more and don't get out and connect with neighbors as much.
Yeah. We've become
Isn't
little
that
bitches.
interesting?
Yes. You know, it's funny that you bring that up. How many other countries, I'm not talking third world countries, but other countries, is it absolutely necessary and socially unacceptable for hotels to have air conditioning? That would be ludicrous here. If I was trying to check into a hotel in Houston that did not have air conditioning, there is no way in hell I'm checking in there. No way.
Not Houston in the summer.
I mean, but then you go in somewhere in Italy or Rome and just Greece.
And it's gone.
It's all gone.
This one is really interesting that I just saw here. The fact that Europeans, men, women, and children drank beer instead of water in the fridge because it was safer. Meanwhile, in Asia, they drank tea. Comparing the effects of caffeine versus alcohol, it's no wonder their society is friendly and cooperative, and ours is self-centered and addiction prone. I don't know if I can go
Whoa.
all the way there with you on that one,
Yeah.
but it's certainly interesting food for thought.
I started to say, what an interesting thought.
Well, and I watched that podcast, the Diary of a CEO podcast yesterday after I took copious notes. But one of the things that I think we talked about in our episode last week about blaming millennials for everything and killing the booze industry, they talked about in that episode about how the lack of drinking, because we're not drinking, the social lubrication has gone away. That liquid courage, if you will, has gone away. And so people don't go out and do stupid things and fail and get rejected or ask that person out and all of these silly things, the ramifications of drinking less and how harmful they have become.
Okay, I'm going to add iPhone cameras to this list because when you talk about that, and we talked about this last night in this group that we had for dinner last night about how our lives would be very, very different if we'd had cell phone cameras when we were growing up. The stupid things we wouldn't have done, wouldn't have learned,
wouldn't have
I mean,
documented to share with the world.
because of the shame that can come from that, or the trouble that can come from that it's just a different. So cell phone cameras are going to be on my list.
I think that's a good one.
I think that's another one though that's kind of on that sliding scale. Like, okay, yeah, because there is so much surveillance, maybe less people are doing things that they shouldn't be doing because they can be recorded. But also it's impacting, maybe there are things that you should be doing that you aren't doing for fear of shame.
Yeah.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Here's another one. Schools not teaching kids how to critically think. We've switched to standardized testing and stopped that critical thinking. I think that's a big one.
I would
think
agree.
our education platform and system in general is one of those that has caused a massive detriment to our population, because we're not teaching people to be people. We're teaching people to be workers.
Yeah.
I also think that we can go back to episode, I think it was 17, where we were talking about oligarchies and the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, where we've essentially legalized buying elections now, and you can see it in real time and what that looks like and means. Like, I think that has been very detrimental to our society and our political landscape.
Interesting thoughts.
Yep. Pretty wild.
Yeah.
All right, Ma.
Okay.
What's our good news story this week?
Oh my gosh. This one, of course, made me cry. So this one is about
Shocker.
a missing toddler. And y'all, this was just a scary story because they talked about this little boy walked out of his house. Mom was busy with another baby.
2
The
years
little boy
old.
walks out of his house and is gone for 7 hours. But the really scary part to me was that the rescue teams that were looking for him were being stalked by mountain lions in this area. This was in Arizona. The good news part of this is that one of the guy's dogs found the baby and brought him home.
Buford.
They said he had wandered 7 miles. Think of this, a 2-year-old had wandered 7 miles away from home. The dog found him, kept him warm, and then brought him home. They were buds like this. And here's where I just lost it.
You're
They
so
gave the dog
funny.
a steak dinner in reward.
Attaboy, Buford.
But the quote was that there were so many things that could have gone wrong with not finding this child, that just one thing made the difference: the dog. So yeah, way to go, Buford. I think you deserve another steak.
I agree.
Isn't that great?
It's this big, huge Great Pyrenees. And I mean, you can just see in everything, he's just like, okay, whatever.
My job.
This is my job. Just
Yeah.
gonna take him home. Come on now, let's go.
And I know how those parents had to feel. That is
Terrifying.
terrifying. And so to see this big old dog bringing him home, it's pretty amazing. Good story.
It was a good story.
All right. I expect y'all to continue to be proud Texans. I think we need to come up with a slogan. So if our listeners have a great slogan, we want to know what it is.
Yes.
We'll promote it.
Yes. To proliferate that line of thinking and share that with the world, to be better people instead of better labels.
So if you're interested, go check out that Times article from 2013. We'll drop the link in the bio. It's a very interesting read for something from 12 years ago.
Yes.
That is still surprisingly pertinent today.
Yeah.
It really was.
Yep.
Love you guys.
Love you guys.